Hello and welcome to Opt to Thrive, episode 22, Rethinking Alcohol.
Welcome to Opt to Thrive, your go-to podcast for women's wellness in midlife, designed to educate, support, and inspire you to live your very best life. And now your host, Dr. Karina Sims.
So, today has been a really good day. So it's Sunday and I've had my bike ride with the girls. I didn't actually get my swim in. I jumped in the river. I went to jump in the river and my goggles broke right down the middle. Never had that happen before. But that's okay. It was a pretty hot morning. And so I was happy just to get in and splash around a little while the other girls did their swim. Then we did our coffee and now I am settling in for a little bit of a sesh here. An interesting one, something that I have been wanting to do for a little while, and yeah, it's been on the list and I'm going to tick it off today. And it might not be a popular one because if you're like I was, you might be a little bit resistant to hearing, how that alcohol might not be serving you. So, as I said, this week I've chosen to do a little focus on alcohol. This one can be very interesting because some of us are particularly attached to our alcohol. As I said, that was me at one point. It wasn't awfully long ago when I made the decision to cut back myself. And now I didn't say completely stop, but I did drastically cut back on my pretty regular glass or two of Savvy. And I'm telling you, it really did take a fair bit of suffering with the hormonal symptoms of menopause to finally get me to even consider it was something I needed to address. There was definitely a fair bit of denial involved. That is for sure. So probably one of the big turning points for me came when I listened to the Huberman Lab podcast episode titled What Alcohol Does to Your Body, Brain, and Health, and that was published in August 2022. I'll put a link in the show notes in case it's something that you want to have a listen to. It is about 2 hours long, so, settle in. I have actually listened to it a few times, though, because there was so much really good information packed in there. And looking back, it really was the kind of final jolt I needed to make the change that I had been kind of wanting to make for a while. And now, earlier this month, or last month by the time this episode is uploaded, on the 3rd of January, the Surgeon General in the States released an advisory on the link between alcohol and cancer risk. So you might have noticed there's a fair bit going on social media, and there's a few podcasts coming out about it at the same time. It just seems like people are talking about it a bit more at the moment. And this is a topic that I have been wanting to tackle in a little bit more depth for a while, and so this just seemed like a really good time to do it. Now, really, mainly because honestly, when I think of alcohol and the risks involved with alcohol, cancer is not one of the main ones that pops into my head. And this link to cancer is the whole reason this advisory's been put out. So I thought if I'm not thinking about it, then I'm also probably not doing a good enough job highlighting this for my patients or for those of you who are choosing to get their information from this podcast. And so here we are. So today I'm going to dive into that a bit more, along with looking at alcohol consumption in particular through the lens of a midlife woman, what things we need to be thinking about at this stage in our lives. So now, as I said, that Huberman podcast was the jolt that I needed, and where it really hit home for me was when he said that alcohol was a poison. I mean, duh, really. But I just don't think I ever really thought of it that way before, or maybe it was just the right time for me to hear it in that way to make me get this more than just on an intellectual level. I mean, like, really get it. He talked a little bit about the biochemistry as well, which I think is really helpful to set the stage for all the things that we want to get into. So I also want to kind of start there. Now, I promise I'm not going to nerd out. I'm going to make it really simple. But I do think that there's a lot of value, and it's fascinating, in understanding what's happening to our bodies when we consume alcohol. So first of all, there are three main types of alcohol: isopropyl, methanol, and ethanol. Now, isopropyl alcohol is found in rubbing alcohol and hand sanitizers, cleaning products, that kind of thing. Methanol is found in antifreeze, paint thinner, window cleaner, and both of these types of alcohol are not fit for human consumption. In fact, you may recall hearing about methanol a bit last year because it was implicated in the deaths of some young girls in Bali last year, very sadly. Ethanol is the alcohol that's found in the alcohol that we drink. So all of these alcohols are toxic, and even ethanol, if consumed in too high a quantity at once, can be lethal. Now, alcohol is somewhat unique in the way that it acts in our bodies. It's both what we call water and fat soluble, and this is one of the reasons why it can be so damaging. So what does that mean? Most substances are either water soluble or fat soluble, and most other substances need special help getting out of our gut and into our body. Being both fat and water soluble means the alcohol is very easily absorbed by our cells, and in fact, it travels freely across the blood-brain barrier. This barrier is a layer of cells that kind of acts as a filter. It's supposed to keep harmful substances from getting out of our bloodstream and into our brain cells and causing damage. Now, most things cannot waltz in and out of our cells like they own the place. They usually need some help. They either need to fit onto a receptor or they need to be taken by the hand and guided through, but not ethanol. It moves pretty freely through our cells and tissues. So we take in this toxin, ethanol, into the body, and then the body has to get rid of this toxic substance. And most of this happens as it passes through the liver. And because the liver is the main place for doing a lot of this metabolizing or breaking down of ethanol, it takes a bit of a beating, and some of the cells get damaged and we lose some cells in the process. But the liver isn't the only place that this metabolism is happening in our bodies. It also happens in other tissues because, as I said, it can move freely into our cells. So metabolism also takes place in our pancreas, our brain, and our gut. And if these cells do some of the metabolizing, then it makes sense this can also cause damage to these cells and tissues as well. So when ethanol is metabolized, we get something called acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is even nastier than ethanol, and in fact, it actually is a poison. Acetaldehyde then gets broken down into acetone, which goes through a few more steps, and eventually the final byproducts are carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide gets removed from our bodies by breathing, and the water gets either retained, weed out, or some of it is lost in sweat. Now this brings me to hangovers, because ethanol has a diuretic effect, which means it just makes us wee more. And this is because it acts against a hormone that our body normally uses to help our kidneys retain water to keep us hydrated, so managing the water balance in our body. This increased urination causes us to not only lose water, but also some important electrolytes like sodium, potassium, magnesium, and we become dehydrated. Symptoms of dehydration would be things like thirst, dry mouth, headache, fatigue, dizziness, weakness, maybe even lightheadedness. Sounds familiar, right? Maybe like a bit of a hangover? So yes, dehydration is one of the biggest mechanisms in having a hangover. Now that acetaldehyde we talked about is also causing damage to cells and tissues, which causes inflammation, especially in regards to our stomach lining, which can contribute to nausea and vomiting. And even though our bodies are working really hard and really fast to clear the acetaldehyde, if we drink a lot of alcohol, our liver is overwhelmed by the amount of ethanol, so more acetaldehyde can build up and worsen the hangover symptoms. Our immune system has also been triggered, and in the background, it's gone into serious damage control. It's releasing its own molecules, and these molecules can also contribute to the malaise, the headache, and the muscle aches that we feel as well. Now, have you ever wondered why some people don't seem to get hangovers, and there are people who seem to get really sick with hangovers? There's a few reasons for that. Genetics play a really big role. Some people have genetics that are more efficient at metabolizing the ethanol and acetaldehyde, and then some people have genetics that are much less efficient. So for example, there are some studies that estimate that about 40 to 50% of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean populations have a genetic variation in the enzyme that we need to metabolize acetaldehyde. So they really can't process it very well, and they can become quite unwell. Bigger bodies, healthier bodies, more hydrated bodies may also avoid hangovers more. So note to self, drinking lots of water if you're going to have alcohol can be helpful to help prevent a hangover. Now, drinking regularly over time will cause our body to adapt to its effects. Our bodies are amazing adapting machines. So when it adapts to its effects, we need more and more to get those feel-good effects that most people drink alcohol for, and this is called tolerance. Now, interestingly enough, though we may need more and more to feel those effects, the ethanol metabolizing process still can get overloaded, and that is why you may have heard of someone having a really high blood alcohol level, but they don't seem ridiculously drunk. So they may look okay, but still have a blood alcohol reading that records as being legally drunk. It turns out there are a few types of tolerance. One type of tolerance happens in our brain and nervous system so that the cells are less sensitive to ethanol, and that's where we need more and more to feel the same effects. Another type of tolerance happens in our liver, when our liver develops more enzymes to cope with the consistent high exposure to ethanol to help us process it a bit faster. Now remember, even if someone has a higher metabolic tolerance, so they can process the alcohol more quickly, meaning their blood alcohol level won't rise as much as someone who drinks the same amount, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's less damage being done to the liver or less overall intoxication. It just means the alcohol is leaving the bloodstream faster. And then there's behavioral tolerance, and this is where the brain learns to adjust for the effects on coordination, thinking, and motor skills. So for example, someone who drinks regularly may seem less impaired when they're walking or talking compared to someone who rarely drinks, even though both of them could have the same exact blood alcohol level. Now, it's the acetaldehyde that I mentioned earlier that is implicated in increasing the risk of several different types of cancers. And that's because it can attach itself to the DNA in our cells. This can cause mutations, and that can become a cancer. So cancer starts when DNA in a cell is damaged or mutated, and this leads to an uncontrolled cell growth. The mutations can disrupt normal cell function, and it allows the cells to multiply uncontrollably. So over time, this results in the formation of tumors and then the potential spread of cancer cells to other parts of the body. Alcohol consumption is one of the leading preventable causes of cancer globally, somewhere behind tobacco use and obesity. And I want to point out that no type of alcohol, beer, wine, spirits, seems to be any less risk than any of the other ones. There are 7 main cancers associated with alcohol: colorectal, esophagus, liver, mouth, throat, larynx, so the voice box, and breast cancer. Now, all of those except breast cancer make common sense to me, I suppose, because the alcohol would come in contact with all of those areas as it's moving into and being metabolized by the body. For breast cancer, there's a different mechanism, and though it doesn't look like the mechanisms are completely clear yet, it does partly appear to be related to the changes in hormone levels made by the alcohol. When I looked at the numbers, I was actually really taken back by the numbers that are showing up in the research in terms of alcohol and breast cancer in particular. For breast cancer specifically, around 16% of total breast cancer cases appear to be linked to alcohol consumption. Now, generally speaking, for the increase of those 7 cancers I listed, this goes for both men and women, but women do seem to be at a higher risk overall. For instance, at less than 1 standard drink a day on average for women, she has an absolute risk of 16.5% of cancer, where men drinking the same are at an absolute risk of 10%. The increased risk shows up from having, on average, less than 1 drink a day. The risks increase by more than 1.5 times when we move that to an average of 1 standard drink a day. And again, the risk goes up another 1.5 times if we go to 2 standard drinks on average a day. So in terms of cancer risk, the risk increases with any alcohol consumption. For us midlife women, really now starting to pay attention to protecting our muscle and bones, because that estrogen that used to be doing that isn't there doing the job anymore, this next one's super important. And again, not something that I would have immediately thought of when thinking about the effects of alcohol. What I'm referring to is the relationship between alcohol consumption and the health of our bones. What we know is that chronic alcohol use is associated with decreased bone mineral density, so weakening of our bones. And look here, sisters, we don't really need anything else negatively affecting our bones. And this goes for smokers too. Smoking can also negatively impact our bones, in case you didn't know, but that's a topic for another day. Now, I was able to find a systematic review and meta-analysis that looked at the effect of alcohol on osteoporosis. It was published in April 2019 in the Journal of Drug and Alcohol Dependence. They found that compared with those who drank no alcohol, those who had 1/2 to 1 drinks per day had 1.38 times the risk of developing osteoporosis. Those who had 1 to 2 drinks per day had 1.34 times the risk of developing osteoporosis. And for 2 drinks or more a day, they had 1.63 times the risk of developing osteoporosis. And remember, this is the average over a week. So definitely evidence to show alcohol use over time can affect our bones. Now, I want to talk about one of the main reasons I had been thinking about cutting back on alcohol for a while, and that is to do with its impact on sleep. If you've been listening to me, you know that sleep was a major issue for me going through this midlife period, and I finally have got that sorted out, and it's bliss. And no doubt, part of that sorting out was really cutting back the alcohol. A lot of people think that alcohol is good for sleep because it helps get them to sleep. It's a little bit of a sneaky one though, because alcohol can cause a couple of other issues. Now, I think before we talk about how alcohol can impact sleep, it's important to point out the hormonal changes around menopause are also notorious for affecting sleep. In particular, we can find it harder to fall asleep, we can wake up easier through the night, find it difficult getting back to sleep, and we can have a decrease in our rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep. The major one for me was that stupid 3 a.m.-ish wake up and inability to fall back to sleep for hours on end. The other one was waking up feeling completely wrecked. Now, funnily enough, alcohol may put us to sleep, but similarly to the changes our hormones are often already causing, as the night goes on, the effects of the alcohol cause increased wakefulness and also reduces our total amount of REM sleep. REM sleep is super important for emotional regulation, hello road rage, and the time I lost it 3 times out in the boat on the river, and my adult son was like, Mom, what's going on? REM sleep is also important for memory consolidation, so a disruption in REM sleep can affect our cognition, hello brain fog. We also know that poor REM sleep can impact feelings of well-being and in particular predispose to anxiety and depression. And surprise, alcohol consumption can in its own right also predispose to anxiety and depression. Ironically though, people often self-medicate anxiety and depression with alcohol, and it can be hard to get them to see that this can be a perpetuating cycle. Alcohol can also worsen hot flushes and cause reflux, heartburn, both of which can also impact our sleep, as they did mine. If you've been listening for a while, you'll also have heard me talk about our increased risks after menopause of some other chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. alcohol increases the risk of all of these things too. Now, I went and had a look at the recommendations by country because I just had a conversation with my bestie Suzanne, who you may have remembered from other episodes, in Canada, and she told me that they had changed their recommendations recently. So I wanted to kind of compare and see what everyone else is doing and just kind of go over what the recommendations are currently here in Australia. And because a good bulk of Opt to Thrive listeners are Australian, Canadian, and the States, I looked at all three of them. And it's really interesting to see how different they are. So even though most of my listeners are here in Oz, I'm going to start with the Canadian guidelines because these were the ones I found the most interesting. The Canadian guidelines were updated in 2023 by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, and this is how they read. There is a continuum of risk associated with weekly alcohol use where the risk of harm is, and then they list it by how much you drink. At 0 drinks per week, not drinking has benefits such as better health and better sleep. At 2 standard drinks, now their standard drink is just under 14 grams of alcohol, so it's a 12-ounce beer, a 5-ounce wine, or a 1.5-ounce spirit. So 2 standard drinks or less per week, you are likely to avoid alcohol-related consequences for yourself or others at this level. At 3 to 6 standard drinks per week, your risk of developing several types of cancer, including breast and colon cancer, increases at this level. At 7 standard drinks or more per week, your risk of heart disease or stroke increases significantly at this level. And then it says each additional standard drink radically increases the risk of alcohol-related consequences. So I thought that was a very interesting way to have a guideline or recommendations. Now in Australia, our standard drink is 10 grams. That's a 30 ml nip of spirit, 100 mils of wine, a full strength beer, 285 ml glass, a light beer, a 425 ml glass, or a cider is 285 ml glass. Our guidelines say to reduce the risk of harm from alcohol-related disease or injury, healthy men and women should drink no more than 10 standard drinks a week and no more than 4 standard drinks on any one day. In America, their guidelines read women should have 1 or less alcoholic drink per day, men should have 2 or less per day. Their serving size is 14 grams, so very similar to the Canadian servings. They also note these recommendations are the amount on any one day. They're not an average. So you should have more than 1 a day as a woman, no more than 2 a day as a man. Now, because some of us have children soon to become adolescents or are adolescents or like me are young adults, I also really wanted to touch on alcohol consumption in this population. This is an area that as a parent, I feel like I really could have done so much better in not only the behavior that I was modeling for them, but in educating them about the risks. What we know is that drinking alcohol during adolescence does have some significant neurobiological and behavioral consequences. So during adolescence, the brain is going through some critical development, and this makes it even more vulnerable to the effects of alcohol. Studies have shown that alcohol use during this period can actually alter brain structure and function. This can cause cognitive impairments with learning, memory, visuospatial functioning, so skills like being able to recognize shapes, judge distances, figure out where things are in space, like knowing how to park a car or put a puzzle together. Attention, executive functioning, so that's making decisions, staying organized, controlling impulses, managing tasks like planning your day or remembering to finish a project. Alcohol use in adolescence is also linked to increased anxiety, impulsivity, and risk-taking behaviors, and it can increase the risk of alcohol dependence and other psychopathologies later in adulthood. My approach was to be very open about alcohol use in adolescence, as I know that when you're told you can't have something, human nature is often to make you want it more, and I'm still really happy that that's the approach that I took. My children are very open and honest with me, sometimes maybe a bit uncomfortably honest. But I would not trade that for the world. I would much rather know what is happening than them sneak behind my back and get into trouble and not feel like that they could call me. So I never forbade it. It was a really tricky time to navigate because the drinking culture did seem to start fairly young. I want to be someone they can call no matter what, but I do know I could have had more conversations about alcohol and the implications involved with drinking at that age. Now, to finish up, I think I would be remiss if I didn't at least touch on when drinking alcohol is a problem. So, as I just talked about, for adolescents, it's a problem, and it really would absolutely be best if they didn't drink at all. The same goes for pregnant women, but for the rest of us, I think there's still some confusion around what it means to be an alcoholic. Now, it turns out the term alcoholic is an outdated term, but we probably all have in our mind's eye what that might look like to be an alcoholic. And this picture may be what allows some people to keep drinking alcohol in a way that's probably problematic, but this picture might allow them to remain in denial. We now have the term alcohol use disorder, and this is defined as a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. Alcohol use disorder is a broader diagnosis, and it includes a whole range of problematic drinking behaviors from alcohol abuse to alcohol dependence. Now, alcohol abuse refers to a pattern of drinking that causes significant impairment or distress. So this could be causing recurrent issues with work, school, home, drinking in a physically hazardous situation, or having alcohol-related legal or social problems. So that's abuse. Alcohol dependence is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder where there's a compulsive urge to consume alcohol, where they have loss of control over alcohol intake, and they have withdrawal symptoms when alcohol use is reduced or it's stopped. There's tolerance, so as we said, they need more alcohol to achieve the same effect. There's physical dependence, so the withdrawal symptoms, and continuing to drink even though there are adverse consequences. There are a list of questions that can be used to screen for someone who might have an alcohol use disorder. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through those. So if you're concerned or you're concerned about someone else maybe having an alcohol use disorder, then maybe have a listen to the questions. If you answer yes to 2 or more of these questions in the past year, then you could have an alcohol use disorder. In the past year, have you had times when you ended up drinking more or longer than you intended? Have you had more than once wanted to cut down or stop drinking or tried to but couldn't? Have you spent a lot of time drinking, being sick from drinking, or getting over other after effects? Have you wanted to drink so badly you couldn't think of anything else? Have you found that drinking or being sick from drinking often interfered with taking care of your home or your family or caused job troubles or school problems? Have you continued to drink even though it was causing trouble with your family or your friends? Have you given up or cut back on activities you found important, interesting, or pleasurable so you could drink? Have you more than once gotten into situations while or after drinking that increased your chances of getting hurt, such as driving, swimming, using machinery, walking in a dangerous area, or unsafe sexual behavior? Have you continued to drink even though it was making you feel depressed or anxious or adding to another health problem, or after having had an alcohol-related memory blackout? Have you had to drink much more than you once did to get the effect you want, or found that your usual number of drinks had much less effect than before? Have you found that when the effects of alcohol were wearing off, you had withdrawal symptoms such as trouble sleeping, shakiness, restlessness, nausea, sweating, a racing heart, dysphoria, so feeling uneasy or unhappy, malaise, a general sense of being unwell, or feeling low, or a seizure, or sensed things that were not there? So any of these symptoms can be a cause for concern. And if you're concerned, if you're worried about yourself or a loved one and you're not sure where to turn, I'm going to list some free resources in the show notes. I'll list resources for Aussies, another one for Canadians, and another one for Americans. I hope that this has been really eye-opening for you. I know that I learned a few things in going down this rabbit hole, and cutting my alcohol consumption back to an occasional glass of wine or two has been really helpful, not only for my sleep, but also for making some body composition changes, like losing a lot of my midsection muffin top. I'm not yet totally giving it up, but I'm pretty happy with where I'm at the moment. So I hope this has been helpful. If you can think of someone who might get something out of it, please share. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast. I hope you have a great week, everyone. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive.
The Opt to Thrive podcast is designed for information purposes only and is not engaged in the giving of medical advice. The information provided on the podcast should not be used for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease. In no way should the information provided by Opt to Thrive be considered medical advice, and at all times the advice of a medical professional should supersede recommendations from Opt to Thrive. If you have or suspect you may have a health problem, you should consult your healthcare provider. The views expressed in this podcast are purely that of Dr. Sims and do not in any way reflect those of the institutions she contracts her medical services to.
Thank you for listening to Opt to Thrive. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate and share the podcast. You can visit our website at opttothrive.com and leave a comment for any subjects you would like to hear more about.